Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Disu and you're watching Data Science with Disu. So this is the part 2 of the SQL series that we have started. So if you want to watch the last part, check out here and then after start this part because this is a continuation of that part. So in this session what we are going to discuss, we are going to discuss the data integrity and constraints. Now what is that thing? So in the previous session, like we have introduced fundamentals of database management system and then we have started the relational model of database. So inside that relational model we are going to discuss the data integrity and constant. So data integrity refers to maintaining and assuring the accuracy and consistency of data over its entire life cycle. That means whenever you are creating a table or a data, so you want to make sure that the accuracy and the consistency of data over its entire life cycle is maintained. Now how that will be maintained? Using some kind of data integrity and constants. So what does this data integrity and constant do? So by applying data integrity and constant, we actually restrict data that can be entered or modified in the database. That means we are controlling, while defining that table or data, we are controlling that what are the permissible values that can be entered or modified in that database. So database system offers three types of integrity. The first one is the entity integrity, then the domain integrity, and then referential integrity. So first we are going to discuss about the entity integrity. So what does an entity integrity say? That each table must have a column or a set of columns through which we can uniquely identify a row. These columns cannot have empty or null values. So let's say an example of a classroom where there are many students present there. Since there are many students in that classroom, how you will actually identify uniquely each of them? So you cannot call them by name क्योंकि name बहुत सारे duplicate हो सकते हैं. That means more than one student can have same name. So उससे uniquely identify तो नहीं होगा. So if you remember what we actually do, we assign a roll number to each of the students. So वो roll number जो हम assign करते हैं वो क्या है? That is a kind of primary key. So I will actually explain you what is primary key. But using that primary key, we are applying entity integrity. That means since you have a roll number, each student have a unique roll number. So you can uniquely identify each of the students. The same thing is going with the data set. Let's say you have many rows of data set. Now for each row to be uniquely identified, you need to apply that entity integrity. That means आपके पास कोई ऐसा column or a set of columns, that means more than one columns भी हो सकते हैं, through which you are uniquely identify each of these rows. So let's say if this is a student table, then in this case roll number will be what? Roll number will be a primary key, and using this primary key you are applying entity integrity. And there is one more condition, that it cannot have any empty or null value. So ऐसा तो कोई रोल नंबर हो नहीं सकता है जिसका किसी बच्चे का रोल नंबर ही नहीं हो. अगर कोई स्टूडेंट है क्लास में, then this student must have a roll number. That is what that condition says. That means आपके पास कोई column है that is uniquely identify each rows. So उस column में जितने भी values है that should be none null. So that was about entity integrity. Now we are going to discuss domain integrity. So what does it say? That all attributes in a table must have a defined domain. That means a finite set of values. So हमने एक domain term सीखा था, like in the last session in the relational model we have a term that is domain. So what does a domain say? That whatever the set of value that is defined in a domain, only those value can be entered into that column. So this column cannot contain any extra value that is not available there. So that is what we are talking about, a finite set of values which have to be used. So let's say we are taking the example of same classroom. Inside that classroom we are having the name of the students. So let's say the first column is the name of the students, and let's say instead of first, this is the second column, and the first column is the roll number which is uniquely identifying each of these rows. Now let's say the third column is gender. So in gender we must have a set of value either male or female. So we can set that domain that the value that should contain inside the gender column must be either M or F. That means male or female. So it cannot have any letter like A, S or anything like that. So if in future after defining this table someone has entering some value, let's say A here, so it should give an error because you have defined a domain that it should contain only M and F. So this was one example of domain integrity. And the second example can be anything like if you are having, let's say, a marks column. Let's say this is the fourth column, you are having marks. So inside marks, since let's say the maximum marks is 100, So you are applying a constant that the marks should be always less than equal to 100. So this is what you are just checking the values, because you cannot have any value now of the marks which is greater than 100, because this is the maximum mark. So if in future, let's say someone is entering some values which is by mistake, let's say is entering 105, so it will give an error that this cannot be inserted because you are having a check constant. So this is actually called a check constant. It is just checking that the value is between 0 to 100. So this was about domain integrity. So you have seen entity integrity, which is applied to uniquely identify each of these rows, and then you have a domain integrity which can be applied on a columns to check the data types or check constant to check the values or to set the domains like permissible values. Then you have a third constant that is called referential integrity. So what is that thing, referential integrity? So every value of a column in a table must exist as a value of another column. What does that mean? That means, let's say you have a two tables. This is the first table and this is the second table. Now if they are connected to each other, that means they must have a referential integrity, and this can be applied using a foreign key. So इसका मैंने एक clear example first part में दिया था. Like here you can see, if you have a customer table and then shipping table. So you can see in customer table you have a customer ID column, and in the shipping table also you have a customer ID table. So what is happening here? These both two tables are connected to each other through this customer ID column. So this is what, this is called a foreign key. So this customer ID for this table is a foreign key, and in customer table this is what, in customer table this is actually primary key, because this is actually uniquely identifying each of these customers. So using this foreign key you are actually making a referential integrity to the customer table from the shipping table. So this is what it is actually telling, that a referential integrity between two tables connect to each other. So you can see this green one, this is what, this is foreign key and this is any columns, let's say, and these are actually connected to each other. So this is a kind of referential integrity has been set up between two tables. So this was just a brief about the data integrity. So we are going to discuss actually in detail what is actually primary key and what is foreign key, and there are many other different kinds of keys and constants that is available. So we are going to discuss them one by one. So let's move forward. So we are going to first start with a candidate key. So as I've said that there are many other types of keys that is available to apply some kind of integrity. So we are going to first start with a candidate key. So a candidate key is a minimal set of columns and attributes that can be used to uniquely identify a single row in a relation. Now by definition you might be confusing that this is the same definition of a primary key. So what is actually a candidate key? So just wait, I will actually tell you the difference between the candidate key and a primary key. But before that, I just wanted to give an introduction of both this candidate and primary key, and then at last I will compare what is actually difference between them. So by definition you have understood, but candidate keys are identified during the database design. That means whenever you are designing a database, that means designing a database means what, you are creating the structure of a table. That means let's say आप employee table create करो, so inside that employee table you must have some of the column names. That means employee number, then name, then Aadhaar number, then salary, then date of birth. Let's say these are the features that you are actually creating inside that employee table. Now उस employee table में कौन सा primary key होगा आपका, then what are the domain that you are setting, that means set of values. Let's say for salary you are setting that the salary should not be beyond 1 lakh, it should be let's say between 20,000 to 1 lakh, like that different kind of constant you can also set. And let's say for Aadhaar number it should be always of 12 digits, so you can apply that constant here. So this is what, this is called a database design. That means you are creating the features and the set of constant that you have already seen. Now with respect to candidate key, we are going to discuss like for an employee table what are the columns that can be considered as a candidate key. Now let's say first of all the first column is the employee number. Let's say you are taking that employee number as a candidate key. Now the definition of candidate key was what? A candidate key is a minimal set of columns and attributes that can be used to uniquely identify a single row or tuple in a relation. So employee number can be what? It seems to be a good candidate key because for each employee the employee number is unique, and employee number is created for that purpose only, that it should be unique for each employee for that company. So this can be considered as a candidate key. Now let's say you are taking the Aadhaar number as a candidate key. Now in that case this seems to be a good candidate key for company based in India, because you know that Aadhaar number is defined in India. Let's say there is a company which is established in also India and out of India also. So in that case, for the employee which are working outside of India, there should be no any Aadhaar number na, because in that country there are no Aadhaar number available. So in that case, this is only applicable if the company is based on India, but for a multinational company this is not applicable as a candidate key. The third one is, let's say, name. So name cannot be a candidate key because name repeating हो सकते हैं for different employees. Date of birth can be also repeating, but if you take the combination of both name and date of birth, so this is also applicable, like you can take more than one columns as a candidate key. That means the combination of columns. So let's say name and date of birth you are taking at a time, but even in that case it might be possible now that the name and the date of birth of two employees are same. Like for a small company it cannot be possible. Let's say for a company which are having 10 people, only 10 working people, it might be possible that all of those employees will have a different name and date of birth. But for a company, let's say for a multinational company which is very large, in that case there might be possibility that name and date of birth will be same for more than one employees. So in that case this will also not work. If you take salary will be generally same now for same level of employee. So in that case this is not definitely a good choice. The last one is the employee number and the date of birth. Now in that case the interesting thing is that employee number itself is a candidate key. So in that case, if you take date of birth together with employee number, this is not called a candidate key. Why? Because you have seen na, a candidate key is the minimal set of columns. Agar employee name alone is creating that candidate key, why we add date of birth to that? So that is why the set of employee number and date of birth is not a candidate key. So definitely the best choice is the employee number to be a candidate key. With that, we are going to move towards the primary key now. So primary key is the candidate key that is chosen to uniquely identify a row in a relation. The mandatory and the desired attribute for a primary key are like this. One is the mandatory and the desired attribute for a primary key. That means the first one is the must uniquely identify a tuple, and the second thing is must not allow the null values. So here comes the first difference between the primary and the candidate key. So in candidate key it was not a constant that it must not allow null values. So candidate key में some null values हो सकते हैं, but in primary key it is not permissible. So these are two mandatory attributes and there are some desired attributes also. That means it should not change with time. So आपको कैसा primary key choose करना है, that should not change with time. ऐसा नहीं है कि आपने ऐसा कुछ primary key दिया जो कि future में exist ही नहीं कर रहा है. So you should have that idea that which primary key should be given so that it will be not changing with the time. Also it should have short size, example numeric data type. So this is a desired property, not a mandatory property. Now there comes another term that is composite primary key. So when two or more columns together identify the unique row, then it is referred as a composite primary key. So if there is a single column, then it is a primary key. If there is a more than one column together uniquely identifying that row, that is called composite primary key. So for example, employee number, again a good candidate as it is numeric, cannot be null and does not change with time. So these three properties are matching, that is why it is a good primary key. Then Aadhaar number, it will be null for people who do not have Aadhaar card. So in that case this is not a primary key. Then the third one is the name and the date of birth. So both name and date of birth cannot be null. However, even if uniqueness is granted, it is not a good choice due to large size. So let's say for a smaller company, if this combination is unique, even then it is not desired because it will create a large size, like together name and date of birth will have a large size. So as you have seen that desired properties, it should have short size, and example is one of the numeric data types. So this is definitely not a good choice. Now we are going to see what are actually a difference between primary and candidate key. So one difference you have already seen, that based on the null values, but we are going to look at some other differences, like based on the parameters of comparison. Let's say the basic is there can be only one primary key in a relation, and candidate key there can be multiple candidate key in a relation. So as you have seen, like for a company based on India, the employee number can be a candidate key, then Aadhaar number can be also a candidate key if it is an India based company. But if you talk about the primary key, it should have, for a relation it should have only one primary key. So either you have to choose employee number or Aadhaar number as one of the primary key. based on the specifying that it is not mandatory to specify a primary key for each relation. So it may be possible that for a table primary key is not available, but it is not possible to define any relation without the candidate key. Why this is happening? Because you must have a column to uniquely identify each of the rows, but those column may contain null values in some scenario. In that case primary key तो available होगा नहीं, but you must have a candidate key to uniquely identify each of the rows which allow some of the null values. And the third one, based on the null values, you have already seen that primary key, in primary key no null values is permissible, but in candidate key null value is permissible. Fourth one is the, based on the feature, a primary key defines the most important attribute of a relation, and candidate key features candidates that can be defined as a primary key. So this is not a major difference, like this is primarily connected to this one, like a primary key is the candidate key and each candidate key is not the primary key. Like every primary key can be called a candidate key because it is uniquely identify each of the rows, but every candidate key is not possible to call as a primary key, because for candidate key it might be possible that it is containing some of the null values. So in that case this will be not a primary key. So that was the major difference between primary and candidate key. Next we are going towards the foreign key. So we have seen that foreign key, using foreign key what we do, actually we apply the referential integrity. Now using referential integrity we actually connect two tables. So a foreign key is a set of one or more columns in the child table. So I will actually tell you what is actually child table or a parent table, so whose values are required to match with the corresponding columns in the parent table. So let's say this is the employee table and this is the computer table. Now the table in which the foreign key is available, this is called, pardon my handwriting, so this is actually called the child or referencing table. Now this foreign key is referencing toward the primary or the unique key of the parent table. So how you will actually identify between the parent and the child table? So when there is a primary key or a unique key available for the column that is common between them, this is called a parent table, and when that common column is actually a foreign key in a table, this is called actually a child table. Like for employee table, computer ID cannot be a unique or primary key for that table, it must have a employee ID, so like this one. So this is actually a primary key for this table, and this one is the foreign key for that table. Similarly for computer table, computer ID is the primary key for that table. Now you can observe one thing, that the foreign key can contain null values, but the same column which is present in the parent table, like in the computer table, since it is a primary key for here, so it should not have any null values present here. You can see using that computer ID column we are maintaining the referential integrity between the two tables using the foreign key, which is computer ID. Now let's say for example I want to know that James Potter is using which computer model. So in that case what you will do, in the employee table for the James Potter you will go towards the computer ID, and then you will reference toward the parent table for the computer ID 1001 and the model name is Vostro. So James Potter is using the model Dell Vostro. So this is how a foreign key connects to table. Now this is just a brief introduction that we are covering of about the foreign key and different primary key and candidate keys. But while creating the table हम वो primary key and foreign key actually apply कैसे करते हैं, the syntax actually in the SQL command, वो हम जब SQL शुरू करेंगे command देखना उसका, then we'll look into it. But for now we are just giving the theoretical introduction with what is actually primary key, candidate key and foreign key and other constants. Like we are also going to discuss some of the other constants that is actually applied while creating any table. Let's say the first is the not null. So you can apply the not null constant to any column. So after applying that, what it will do actually, as the name suggests, it will create a constant that the column cannot have a null values. So this is different from the primary key. Like primary key also have not null values, but primary key का condition क्या है, that it's uniquely identify each of the rows. But not null constant लगाने का मतलब नहीं है कि वो primary key है. That means value repeating हो सकता है, but it should not have a null value. So that is the other constant that we have. Then there is a unique constant. So it ensured that all values in a columns are different. So uniquely identify करने के लिए आप unique constant लगा सकते हो, but unique constant लगाने का मतलब ये नहीं कि उसमें null values नहीं आएगा. So उसमें null values आ सकते हैं. Then you have a check constant. So for check constant, as I have given some of the examples, like you can set a range of values for a column. Let's say for a marks table, you are setting the range of values that the marks should be between 0 to let's say 50. That means let's say for a test the maximum marks is 50, so you are ensuring that the marks should be between 0 to 50. So that is one of the check constant that you can apply to check that values. The fourth one is the default constant. So default constant is set for a column if no value is specified. That means let's say there is a column, or let's say for that make column. So if someone is entering the values, let's say inserting some of the extra rows, and if he is not giving the make name for that rows, so in that case if you set some of the by default values, let's say आप by default value set कर दियो that even if someone is not entering some of the value, it should be del. So in that case, when a person is entering an row, in that row if he is giving the value of computer id model name but he is not giving the value of make, in that case अगर आपने कोई default value set किया है let's say del, so यहाँ पे automatically del आ जाएगा. Then the last one is the create index. So it is used to create and retrieve data from the database very quickly. So this is a kind of concept that is used. Let's say you are creating some of the indexing for a column, let's say id. So in that case what happens, if you are applying in a SQL query, so let's say वो 10 सेकंड ले रहा है फेच करने में डेटा. So if you are having a index for some of the columns of that table, so in that case the query will be faster. That means in comparison to 10 seconds, it might be possible that it is fetching the data in 5 seconds only. So like अभी आपको उतना समझ में नहीं आएगा what is that thing creating index, but I will actually show you live that when I run a SQL command without using index and after using index, how the fetching time is actually varying. Yeah, so that was it from this session. In the next session we are going to discuss about some of the SQL commands and the data types that is used in the structured query language. Yeah, so thanks for watching this video. I hope you have liked this video. We'll meet in the next session. Till then, take care. Goodbye.